It is a curious thing about the human soul. It does not wander from God in one great dramatic leap. No, it drifts. It shifts bit by bit until the distance is so great that one no longer hears his voice. It is not the great crimes that create this chasm, but the small, repeated habits, seemingly harmless at first, yet fatal to the spirit. Consider the world around you, filled with noise, entertainment, and the endless flickering of screens. We live in an age where attention is currency and the soul pays the price. Every moment spent in idle distractions is a moment stolen from prayer, from thought, from communion with God. It is not that such things are inherently evil, but they become so when they replace the higher, eternal matters. The enemy of your soul does not need you to curse God. He only needs you to forget him. Imagine a man who once loved his dearest friend, but through negligence ceased to write, ceased to visit, ceased to speak. One day he awakens to realize that the friendship is no more. So it is with God. We expect to remain close to him while forsaking the very means by which we commune with him. Prayer is not a mere duty. It is the oxygen of the soul. Neglect it, and the spirit withers. The devil does not tempt with a noose, but with a thread. Small justifications lead to great failures. Just this once, we say, and soon, virtue is exchanged for convenience. A soul that entertains sin, even in its mildest forms, is like a fortress that welcomes the enemy within its walls and wonders, in time, why it has fallen. God does not demand impossible perfection, but he does require an undivided heart. The most dangerous lie ever whispered into the heart of man is this: you can do it alone. Self-sufficiency is the root of all rebellion. The more we believe in our own strength, the less we rely on God's. We build our kingdoms, set our plans, trust in our wit and resources, only to find that they crumble when the storm comes. To acknowledge our dependence on God is not weakness, it is wisdom. The world teaches tolerance, but often at the cost of truth. How many remain silent when righteousness demands a voice? How many choose comfort over conviction? The habit of avoiding difficult truths leads to spiritual cowardice. God does not call us to be agreeable. He calls us to be faithful. A man who never stands for truth will soon find that he stands for nothing at all. Even if one finds himself far from God, there is hope. The journey back does not begin with grand gestures, but with small, faithful steps. A moment of prayer, an act of repentance, a decision to reject distraction in favor of the eternal. These are the embers that can reignite a smoldering faith. If you have drifted, return. The Father is not distant, it is we who have moved, and he is ever waiting to welcome his children home. Distance from God is rarely the result of a single catastrophic decision. Instead, it is the outcome of small, almost imperceptible shifts that accumulate over time. The spiritual life is not static. It is always in motion, either drawing closer to God or drifting away from him. This drift does not announce itself with fanfare or great alarm. It is silent, patient, and often unnoticed until the soul finds itself far from the warmth of divine presence. The most dangerous aspect of this drifting is its subtlety. If a man were to wake up one morning and decide, with full clarity, that he would abandon his faith, reject prayer, and sever his connection to God, he would at least recognize what he is doing. He would know he has made a deliberate choice, but this is rarely the case. Instead, the process happens quietly, almost invisibly, through small habits and choices that seem insignificant in the moment but collectively shape the condition of the soul. Consider the analogy of a boat untethered from the shore. If the current were strong and sudden, the drifting would be obvious. But if the movement were gradual, an inch here, a foot there, the one aboard may not realize how far he has gone until the shoreline is but a distant memory. So it is with the soul. A missed prayer here, a neglected moment of reflection there, a slight compromise of conviction. Each step is so small that it does not feel alarming. And yet, when strung together over weeks, months, or years, they form a path away from God. This is why the spiritual life requires vigilance. The enemy does not need to tempt a man into outright rebellion. He only needs to encourage complacency. He does not whisper, "Abandon God," but rather, "Not today." He does not demand that one forsake prayer forever, but merely suggests, "You're tired, you can pray tomorrow." He does not argue that righteousness is unnecessary, but persuades, "This one small thing won't matter." A soul that once burned with devotion can, over time, grow cool not through direct attack, but through neglect. Modern life makes this drift all the more insidious. Distraction is everywhere. The mind is constantly occupied with news, entertainment, responsibilities, and endless streams of information. Rarely does one sit in silence, allowing the still, small voice of God to be heard. Even religious devotion can become mechanical, a routine rather than a relationship. A person may still attend church, still say the occasional prayer, still acknowledge God in thought, but the heart has grown distant. The connection, once vibrant, is now weak. Another peril of this slow separation is that it fosters self-deception. A man does not need to declare himself godless to have a godless heart. He may continue to believe in God, speak of Him, even defend Him intellectually, while his soul is functionally disconnected from Him. The mind can know of God while the heart forgets Him. This is why one can feel distant from God even while continuing religious observances. Rituals without relationship create the illusion of faithfulness, while the soul is, in reality, drifting. The remedy to this drift is awareness. A man must examine his own heart and ask, "Have I grown distant from God? Have I become comfortable with a weak connection? Am I spiritually alert or merely going through motions?" Such questions require honesty, for the drift thrives in unnoticed corners of the soul. Recognizing the signs of separation is the first step in restoring closeness. One must also remember that closeness to God is not built on grand moments alone, but on daily faithfulness. It is not regained through a single dramatic decision, but through consistent, small acts of devotion. A return to prayer, a moment of reflection, an intentional effort to prioritize the eternal over the trivial. These are the anchors that keep the soul from drifting. The danger of the subtle drift is that it feels harmless while it is happening. The danger of ignoring it is that one may wake up one day to realize that the shore is no longer in sight. The human mind was not designed to be in a constant state of noise, yet modern life ensures that silence is a rarity. From the moment one wakes, there is an invitation to distraction, notifications waiting on a screen, news demanding attention, entertainment available at every moment. The world has become an endless buffet of diversion, and the soul, once attuned to the voice of God, is now drowned in the ceaseless hum of lesser things. Distraction does not present itself as an enemy of faith. It appears as an innocent companion. A few moments scrolling through a phone, an evening spent watching one show after another, a habit of filling every spare minute with something external. None of these seem harmful in isolation, yet collectively they steal the very thing that fosters closeness with God: stillness. Without stillness, there is no space to hear His voice, no opportunity to reflect, no time to commune with the eternal. The soul is shaped by what it consumes. A man who feeds his mind only with fleeting amusements will find that his thoughts, too, become fleeting. A heart saturated with trivial matters will have little room left for the weightier things of God. The more one indulges in distractions, the less capacity one has for deep contemplation. Spiritual matters begin to feel distant, not because they have lost their value, but because the mind has been trained to operate on a surface level. One of the greatest tricks of the enemy is not to convince a man to hate God, but simply to keep him too busy to think of Him. If the mind is always occupied with lesser things, it has no room to consider greater ones. If every moment is filled with entertainment, tasks, and noise, when will the soul ever stop to listen? The most effective way to keep a person from seeking God is not to remove God from their life, but to fill their life with so much else that He is functionally crowded out. The effects of distraction are not always immediate, but they are always certain. At first, prayer becomes shorter, more rushed. Reflection becomes occasional rather than daily. Scripture, once a source of nourishment, becomes an obligation pushed to the margins. Soon, spiritual hunger diminishes, not because God has changed, but because the appetite has been dulled by lesser things. The danger of distraction is that it creates an illusion of fullness while allowing the soul to wither. A man can be endlessly engaged, constantly stimulated, always entertained, and yet utterly empty. His time is spent, his energy depleted, yet nothing of eternal value has been gained. He may feel productive, but his soul has been starved. He may believe he is too busy for God, but in reality he has simply prioritized everything else over Him. Distraction is not only external, it is also internal. Worries, ambitions, and an obsession with earthly concerns can be just as effective at pulling one away from God as any external noise. A person can sit in silence and still be filled with distractions, thoughts racing, anxieties consuming, plans for the future replacing any thought of eternity. The mind, left unchecked, will naturally gravitate toward the temporary rather than the eternal. Reclaiming focus requires intentional effort. Just as a cluttered room does not clean itself, a cluttered mind will not naturally become still. One must make space for silence, for reflection, for prayer. It is not enough to wish for deeper communion with God. One must actively remove the barriers that prevent it. This may mean setting limits on entertainment, carving out time for quiet, or choosing to sit in stillness even when every impulse urges otherwise. The soul was not made for perpetual distraction. It was made to dwell in the presence of God, to seek Him, to know Him, to be shaped by Him. But if it is never given the chance, if it is always occupied with lesser things, it will drift, unaware that it has lost something precious until it is nearly gone. A relationship cannot thrive without communication. A man who wishes to maintain friendship with another does not do so by merely thinking about him from time to time. He must speak, listen, and engage. So it is with God. Prayer is the language of the soul, the means by which man communes with his Creator. Yet it is often the first thing neglected when life becomes busy, when distractions multiply, or when spiritual lethargy sets in. Neglecting prayer does not always happen by conscious choice. Few would outright declare that they no longer wish to speak to God. Instead, it happens gradually. A missed prayer one morning, a hurried one the next, a season where prayer feels dry or ineffective. Each small neglect weakens the habit until, before one realizes it, prayer has become rare, sporadic, or entirely absent. The effects of this neglect are not immediate, which is why it is so dangerous. A man does not notice at first that his heart is growing cold toward God. He still believes, still acknowledges Him, still holds to the same truth. But without prayer, the connection weakens. The voice of God becomes fainter, not because He has withdrawn, but because the soul has tuned itself to other things. When prayer is neglected, dependence on God is replaced by self-reliance. A man who does not pray begins to believe, even unconsciously, that he can navigate life on his own. He turns to his own wisdom, his own strength, his own reasoning, and in doing so, he places himself at the center of his world. The habit of prayer keeps one humble, reminding the soul of its dependence on God. Without it, pride begins to take root, and the heart, once soft and yielded, becomes hardened and resistant. Reflection suffers the same fate. A life without reflection is a life lived on the surface, reacting rather than understanding, moving without direction. Reflection is the process by which one examines the state of the soul, considers where one has strayed, and realigns with truth. Without it, spiritual decay goes unnoticed. A man who never examines himself may believe he is walking rightly, when in reality he has long since wandered off course. The pace of modern life discourages both prayer and reflection. Time alone, in silence, is seen as unproductive. Stillness is uncomfortable. There is always something to do, something to check, something to keep the mind occupied. The soul, like a garden, requires tending, but a neglected garden does not remain as it was. It becomes overgrown, choked with weeds, unable to bear fruit. So it is with the spiritual life. Without prayer, without reflection, without time intentionally set aside to commune with God, the soul does not merely stay as it is, it deteriorates. Excuses abound. I don't have time. Yet time is given to everything else. The hours spent in entertainment, in work, in trivial pursuits, none of these are questioned. It is only when it comes to prayer that time is suddenly lacking. The truth is, time is not the issue. Priority is. What a man values, he makes time for. If he does not pray, it is not because he cannot, but because he has chosen not to. Prayer is not a ritual to be performed out of duty, nor is it merely a request for blessings. It is the lifeline of the soul, the very means by which one remains near to God. A life without prayer is a life disconnected from the source of all strength, wisdom, and peace. It is no wonder, then, that when prayer is neglected, faith begins to feel weak, temptation grows stronger, and spiritual hunger fades. The soul, deprived of its most vital nourishment, withers. The remedy is simple, yet requires discipline. One must return to prayer, even when it feels difficult, even when distractions press in, even when it seems dry and empty. Prayer is not about emotion, it is about faithfulness. A man who prays only when he feels like it will soon find that he rarely prays at all. But one who prays consistently, even when it feels like mere habit, will find that over time his heart is softened, his spirit strengthened, and his closeness to God restored. A man may neglect prayer for a season, but let him not be deceived. He is not unaffected by it. He is either drawing near to God or drifting from him. There is no standing still. The decline of a man's soul does not begin with great acts of wickedness, but with small concessions. It is not the sudden abandonment of virtue that leads one away from God, but the quiet, unnoticed steps in the wrong direction. The most dangerous temptations are not those that demand immediate rebellion, but those that whisper, "Just this once." A man does not wake up one morning and decide to forsake his moral convictions. He begins with a small justification, a slight bending of the truth, an indulgence in a seemingly harmless pleasure, a compromise made for convenience. At first, his conscience is troubled. There is a moment of hesitation, an awareness that he is stepping off the right path. But if the act is repeated, the hesitation fades. What once pricked the conscience now feels normal, and what was once unthinkable becomes tolerable. Sin, when first encountered, appears as something foreign, something that does not belong to a man's nature. But when entertained, it makes itself at home. The more it is welcomed, the harder it becomes to see it for what it is. The danger of moral compromise is not only in the sin itself, but in what it does to the soul. It dulls the senses, weakens conviction, and makes virtue seem excessive. The man who once stood firmly for righteousness now finds himself excusing things he would have condemned in the past. Compromise rarely presents itself as evil. It often disguises itself as practicality, as a way to avoid conflict, as an opportunity for personal gain. The world does not tempt a man with blatant wrongdoing, but with something that appears reasonable. A lie told to avoid embarrassment, a slight dishonesty in business to gain an advantage, a moral standard bent to fit the expectations of others. None of these seem catastrophic, but they are the beginning of a deeper fall. Each small compromise erodes the foundation of one's character. The man who once prided himself on integrity now finds ways to justify dishonesty. The one who valued purity now entertains thoughts he once rejected. The gradual nature of this descent is what makes it so dangerous. No one believes they are becoming corrupt while it is happening. They see themselves as the same person, only more practical, more understanding, more realistic. But in reality, They have allowed the erosion of their soul. God does not call for partial obedience. He does not say, "Be holy in most things." He demands an undivided heart. The moment one begins to negotiate with sin, he has already lost. He is like a man defending a fortress who opens the gates just a little, believing he can control what comes in. But once the enemy has entered, he does not stop until the city is taken. The world encourages moral compromise. It praises those who are willing to adapt and condemns those who hold to firm convictions as rigid or extreme. There is a constant pressure to conform, to soften one's stance, to blend in rather than stand apart. But the cost of compromise is always greater than it first appears. A man may gain the approval of others, but he loses something far more valuable: his nearness to God, his inner peace, his very soul. Temptation rarely demands that one abandon God outright. It simply asks for a little dishonesty, a little impurity, a little self-indulgence. But the soul cannot serve two masters. What begins as a small concession soon becomes a way of life. The moment one allows a standard to be lowered, the next lowering becomes easier. A life of virtue requires constant vigilance, for even the smallest crack in the foundation can bring down the whole structure. A man must decide in advance what he will not compromise. If he waits until he is tempted, he has already placed himself in danger. Convictions must be held before they are tested, and moral boundaries must be set before they are challenged. The man who walks with God must be willing to stand alone, to endure ridicule, to resist what the world calls reasonable if it contradicts what God calls right. No one drifts into righteousness. It is the result of intentional daily choices. But one can drift into compromise without even realizing it. And by the time he sees where he has gone, he may find that returning is far more difficult than he ever imagined.